Hey guys, Casey Santana, and I'm back with another episode for you guys. We have a special guest for you guys today to dive into a little bit of some strategies for you guys to learn from, or maybe if you guys are looking to get in the cannabis industry, this may give you some ideas of how to go about it. So I may pronounce your last name wrong, so I'll let you say your introduction, but welcome today. I'm so excited to have you on. I know everybody in the community has said a lot of good things about you. I myself personally have been following you for some time now, and I see you're very active in the community, and that's what caught my eye. And so I'm excited to share everybody with you today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Casey. It's great to be here, and you pronounced it right. It's HIRSH JAIN. So you were
as easy as it is. I do usually ask my guests about their morning routine. I am a true believer in most of us, I think, in the cannabis industry have some sort of wellness routine, or they're very into fitness, as I am myself, and just being able to develop their personal development and self-care. What does that play for you as far as your day-to-day? And if cannabis is part of that, please let us know.
Yeah, excellent. Exercise has always been a really big part of my life. I think that's one of the great gifts that my parents gave me, is that we were always really active. One of the things that I really love to do is to run. Although as I'm getting a little older, I'm not as adept as I once was. But I really enjoy using cannabis and running. And one of the things that I love about living in LA is there's so many different parts of LA that have nice little paths. So I really enjoy running the Hollywood Reservoir, or the UCLA track, or just through West Hollywood when I live. And so I have been using cannabis to facilitate my running for pretty much half of my life, right? Ever since I started using cannabis. And one of the beautiful things is that we are now seeing science validate that cannabis can be helpful for exercise. And so when I read studies that show that, running and cannabis activate the same parts of the endocannabinoid system, it really is incredibly inspiring. And I'm actually reading a book called Runner's High right now that sort of dives into this. So it's a huge passion of mine, and sort of aligns with my passion for music. And I think those three things go really well together, running, music, and cannabis. So that's a big part of my routine each morning.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Running, are you running on a treadmill or outside?
Mostly outside. Sometimes I run on a treadmill, which is actually can be a nice change of pace, although I really enjoy running outside because you can see the beauty of the world. And one of the virtues of living in LA is that the weather is really nice. So that's fun. LA is also kind of a crazy place to be a pedestrian. So sometimes it's a little hazardous to run outside. But yeah, most of the time it's outside.
That's funny. I just heard a little commercial on the radio about being careful as far as walking outside in LA, just because of high traffic, and it's just it's beautiful. There's a lot of things to see out there, but that's funny you said that. You consume before you train?
I do, yeah. So I consume normally via a vape. One of my favorite products is the Mammoth Heavy Hitters sort of 1 gram. And so that's a really portable vape that I can take with me. And so I'll go to the Hollywood Reservoir, which is just so beautiful. And it's like a 3.5 mile loop, and I'll take my vape and I'll go for a run, and it's have a great
nice. Yeah, I know some people who run, but they don't want to consume before, which I consume before I train. I just find it more of a muscle mind connection and just that focus. Can you train without music?
That's harder for me. I still enjoy it, but without music, it's just not nearly as fun. So music.
Yeah, for sure. Same here. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, let's get into what you do in the cannabis industry. Well, actually, before we dive into that, how did you get introduced to the plant? Was it more of a medicinal thing for you? Tell us the story of what or how it came to light for you in your life. And then I guess we can dive into kind of what you do as strategically as business wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, cannabis has been a really big part of my life for a long time, ever since I was 15 years old. And I would describe my use as medicinal. I would describe it as spiritual. I would describe it as intellectual, right? Medicinal, also really good for exercise. And so, I got into cannabis when I was 15. I grew up in the Bay Area. Cannabis was a really big part of the culture. Like a lot of people, I probably started using cannabis a little bit too young. But upon using it, I quickly realized that a lot of the myths that I was told about cannabis were just that. They were myths. And, the sort of circle of friends that I would use cannabis with, these were very intelligent people. We would consume cannabis and would get more interested in reading and into philosophy. As I mentioned before, I started experimenting with the use of cannabis and exercise, before that was even mainstream. So, as a 15-year-old, I got into cannabis, and it's been a love affair ever since. And, I would say as time has gone on, my use of the cannabis plant has changed, which is to say, when I was young, we thought of cannabis as a drug. And so there was a tendency to think about it in those terms. But as we've learned more and more about cannabis, and have understood its uses, like I've been able to incorporate a more professional way of using it going forward. So yeah, cannabis has always been a big part of my life. And I started doing advocacy work in cannabis as soon as I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley, being from the Bay Area, and joined the public defender's office at UC Berkeley, defending, students that were accused of cannabis violations by the university. So, I mean, long story short, fell in love with cannabis at a young age, started doing advocacy work before I turned 18. And it's been a privilege to work formally, in the industry for the past 6 years. But before that, I was always sort of a cannabis advocate, and it was a big part of my life.
Wow. Okay. So same for me, 15, about the same. It became daily, probably not till I was a little bit, maybe in my 20s, early 20s, but definitely dibble dabbled around beginning of high school. Was this something that you felt that you were empowered to do, and you just felt like it was a plant medicine that you really want to be an advocate for because you weren't finding yourself so couch locked? I know me personally, even though I was younger, I never, I was very active. I was always working. I had a job. I had 2 jobs actually by the time I was 17, and I was already living on my own. But I'm curious, did it affect you in that way? And how did your family react to you going into the cannabis industry, with your passion for it?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I started using cannabis, and it was immediately apparent to me that this thing was really powerful, but also that a lot of the stigma surrounding it were just inaccurate, right? So you were mentioning, the idea of couch lock. Like, I found that cannabis allowed me to become more active, right, and lean more into exercise, for example. So I quickly found out that a lot of what I was told about cannabis was sort of inaccurate. And it's been a funny thing kind of culturally, right? Which is to say, back when I was using cannabis, the stigma was much greater than it was today. And so I always understood that stigma was inaccurate, but it was something that I had to continue to deal with. And what I'll say is, as an Indian American, it was also quite interesting, which is to say, I started using cannabis, and then I learned about the historic role that cannabis played in Indian culture, the way that was incorporated into Indian medicine. And I learned about the long history that the cannabis plant had in Indian civilization. And yet, my parents came of age during the war on drugs, when the United States was exporting its policy of cannabis prohibition across the world. So what I always thought was funny was that, generations of my family members had used cannabis. My grandfather and my great-grandfather, I found out later in life, were huge consumers of bhang, which is a cannabis cordial used for spiritual and medicinal purposes. But my parents, one generation after them, grew up in an environment where cannabis was stigmatized, not only in India, but also here in the United States. They moved to the US in the 70s. And so I think it's been an interesting evolution over time, where my parents, like many parents of that era, initially looked upon cannabis negatively. But as it has become more normalized in the United States, I think even they are kind of reconnecting to the role that cannabis has played in our culture and in our history. And that's something that I think is beautiful to finally, kind of restore it to its rightful role.
Yeah. And do you bring back information to them to keep them updated as to what's going on in the industry?
I keep them updated on what's going on in the industry because I find it tremendously fascinating, and I love talking to them about the different policy developments that exist. But it's funny with my parents, like, on the one hand, they have peers who will say, hey, can you get me these gummies, right? Like, my mom's friends are now substituting cannabis for other things as they begin to age. So on the one hand, I see a growing cannabis tolerance in my parents and their community, because they are, as many senior citizens are, substituting it for other substances. On the other hand, right, you will occasionally see in the Wall Street Journal or some other article a sort of an article that treats cannabis, akin to reefer madness. And, my dad, for example, has a heart condition. He had a triple bypass surgery a few decades ago. And he will send me these articles that say, hey, cannabis increases your risk for a heart attack, for example. So it's a funny thing, cannabis is being further normalized, and I really enjoy the opportunity to introduce my parents and their community to the medical utility of cannabis. And yet one of the challenges is, given the persistence of a lot of cannabis stigma and, non-scientific reefer madness, I still see the pull that has on my parents' thinking. And part of my motivation to do this work is to normalize cannabis quickly enough so that they and their generation can benefit from its medical efficacy.
Yeah, that I'm so glad you touched on that. Only because my parents are from the Philippines and El Salvador, so two different backgrounds culturally. My dad's a lot more lax with it. He's actually excited to see where it's at, just because he's more familiar with it, living in Guam. He's actually got in trouble for it around 16 and had some issues there. But my mom from El Salvador, they are. I mean, she sees it as a complete drug still. Keep in mind, she does consume tobacco and alcohol still, but for her to really see it as medicinal, there's still a lot of work there. And she came probably when she was 17, but just her, my grandma still comes. Often I have two kids, so she comes over and visits, and she just, my mom knows I'm in the industry. My grandma is she probably smells it, but doesn't say anything. And my mom is like, put everything away, make sure there's no scent, have all the candles on. And so, to your point, there is a lot of work to be done. And I think it starts culturally. And I think, this is a perfect segue to what you do. I see you often at universities doing a lot of educational talks. I don't know if that's part of what you do with Ananda Strategy. The other thing is, Ananda stood out to me because I did a lot of like yogi reading, a lot of books with meditation. Being that your parents are from India and there was some spirituality that you were finding in your lineage of your family members using it in that way, is that what made you develop your business around that name? And then we can go into kind of what you do as far as helping the cannabis people in the industry grow their business and make sure that they're within compliance and all the fun stuff that we have to deal with.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you for asking, Casey. The name Ananda is very special to me. So, I mean, first, as you kind of alluded to, Ananda is a Sanskrit word. It means happiness or bliss. And I think that is the feeling that cannabis and a lot of other plant medicine induces, right? So that's one of the reasons why I named my firm Ananda Strategy. But it also sort of pays homage to the historic role that cannabis has had in Indian culture. It's a really important part of my identity, being Indian American. And so recognizing the historic role that cannabis has had in Indian culture is also, sort of very meaningful to me. But, in addition to that, anandamide is the endocannabinoid, right, that interacts with sort of our system to induce sort of the effect that cannabis has. So it's also a reference to sort of like the scientific underpinnings of sort of the role that cannabis has. And, finally, my name Hirsch, it means joy in Hindi, and that's, kind of close to what Ananda means. And so it's also kind of a reference to my name. So like many things, there are multiple meanings there, but all of them sort of speak to the role that, and the importance that this has, this work has for me. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love when I'm seeing creativity in the name and it's not, I mean, not to bash on anybody, but when I'm just seeing like cannabis business or just, I love that, you put a little bit of thought into it. It really just shows who you are as a person and just how passionate you are about what you're doing in the industry to help people elevate themselves, elevate their brands, and just, learn how to navigate in this crazy time in our specific industry. So with that said, I know you do a lot in the industry. I know you're also part of the chamber and LA NORML, I believe. I'm not sure what your positions are there, but I see you very active in those communities. And, with the cannabis dispensaries, you're very hands-on with them as well. I see you at a lot of the grand openings. Tell us a little bit about what you do. And if I was a brand owner or maybe somebody that's looking to get in the cannabis industry, maybe how you could support me or why I would come to your platform, I should say, or come to you for help.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about so much of what is going on in the cannabis industry, and that just kind of explains all the different things that I'm involved with, right? So, you mentioned NORML. I'm on the board of Cal NORML. I think many people know that NORML has been one of the most longstanding, patient advocacy organizations out there, right? This is a group that sort of sponsored the first medical cannabis law in 1996. We recently passed a law to prevent employees from being fired for off-duty cannabis use. So, my involvement with NORML just reflects sort of, the sort of interest that I have in patient advocacy, and that's work that I really enjoy. You also mentioned the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, and the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce does what its name suggests, right? It tries to create a hospitable business environment for cannabis operators. It tries to make the legal cannabis industry economically viable. And if you believe in the power of the cannabis plant, you will need sustainable businesses to provide healthy and safe product to people. So that's something that I enjoy tremendously. And, I'll speak about the law school teaching and then talk about what my firm does. I am really enjoying teaching at law schools across the country, teaching cannabis law and policy courses. I'll share with you that my kind of secret ambition is to become one of the leading legal academics on cannabis out there. That's my goal. I'm not there yet, but it's definitely a goal of mine. And that's because, for anyone who loves the law, the cannabis industry is probably the most fascinating thing out there. I mean, anyone who truly loves the law and is passionate about cannabis can find really powerful work in this space. I mean, we're talking about an industry that is both federally legal, but is also highly regulated at the state level. There are ballot initiatives that are put on in different states in order to legalize cannabis. The court system, sort of evaluates the constitutionality of those ballot initiatives. So there are all of these interesting legal questions that come along with cannabis, whether they be constitutional. A lot of these laws can be applied in a federally illegal industry. So long story short, the law is a rich kind of like minefield, and I'm really enjoying teaching at these different schools. And to go to what my firm does, Ananda Strategy is a strategy consultancy for all of the various actors in the cannabis space. Now, what that basically means is that we help operators in cannabis develop a strategy and then execute on it, right? So many of our clients are some of the leading dispensaries in California. These are dispensaries like Airfield, like Wheelhouse, like Off the Charts. So helping these dispensaries open up across the state. But we also work with a lot of brands, helping them understand which dispensaries to work with and also help them enter new states. And we also work with, technology businesses and investors that are trying to understand the regulatory climate as well.
No idea that you're actually doing these at specifically law schools. I think I may have caught 2 or 3 that you were at a law school. I didn't know that that was your specific niche, which is amazing.
Yeah.
UCR, USC, those are 2 schools I know here in Southern California that are completely on board in bringing this whole education part to their normal education system. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how, I guess, the feedback is and what you're getting back from just, the law school attendees or students, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting time, as law schools begin to engage with cannabis for the first time, right? And I think in a lot of different educational dimensions, we are starting to see cannabis be, taken seriously as an academic topic. And that's where we are with law schools right now. Out of the 250 law schools in America, less than 10% of them, sort of offer a cannabis policy and law course. And so this is kind of, the moment where many of these institutions for the first time are actually recognizing that this is a significant industry and is, sort of a right field for legal analysis. And so, I've been able to teach at the University of Virginia Law School, really good law school where they recently had their first cannabis policy course. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas just established a cannabis policy center, reflecting for the first time that, this is an sort of topic that is taken seriously there. And so I'm really enjoying helping develop the curriculum in these different law schools. And it is awesome to be able to work with these next generation of law students that are intent on making an impact in the cannabis industry and are culturally, very motivated to participate in the cannabis industry. It's been great to introduce them to this topic and help train, this next generation of legal scholars.
Yeah. Are you finding more kind of curious law students, or are they pretty much people who have always, consumed cannabis and now, there's a lot of diverse backgrounds in the cannabis industry now that I've been in it for a while now. So I'm curious, are they more like, some of them don't even consume that I'm meeting now in the industry? Are they people who consume more, or are they not even consuming cannabis, but still wanting to help the industry?
Yeah, the students that I've taught, some of them consume cannabis, some of them don't, obviously many of them are interested in it, but, some consume, some don't. What has been remarkable is how informed some of these students are, right? One of the things that I really enjoy and I'm passionate about is paying attention to the different regulatory models that exist in states across the country. And it is amazing how familiar these students are with the different models that are going on in different states and how well they're succeeding and where their challenges are. And that's basically the subject of the classes, that I teach, which are these different models that are developing across the country. And I will just say, as time goes on, there will just be more and more interesting issues for these students to sink their teeth into, right? Especially as we think about, leading law firms suing the United States government, arguing that cannabis prohibition is unconstitutional, just as one example. As we engage in a debate, sort of discussion about rescheduling and what the role of different, regulatory agencies will be in a legalized cannabis world. These are all really interesting legal questions, which is why I think you're seeing law schools say, hey, this is like something that we need to teach. It's going to be a huge industry and one that directly implicates the kind of things that we teach at law schools.
Thank you for sharing that. I was curious to know kind of, their mindset and where they're at. And yeah, kudos to them for staying on top of the different regulatory, legislative stuff for a different state, because they are everywhere from every different state. Everybody's different. And even myself here, it's really hard to keep on tabs as to what's going on. For the dispensaries, I know you also help dispensaries re-strategize maybe. You want to touch on how you would help like active dispensaries, because I know California is always struggling. It's a hard market out here, but there's other people that I know in different states that are either, starting up and they're doing very well, but they're still trying to figure out how to reach their consumers in a new market or in a state that's maybe only medicinal. Any tips for those people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so what we do is we help dispensaries with their expansion strategy. And I think California is a great example. California is a huge state. There are 482 different cities in California. Each of those cities gets to decide whether they're going to allow cannabis sales or not. And only about a third of the cities in California allow for a retail cannabis business. And so what working with these dispensaries involves is putting together a plan about how they get from 3 dispensaries to 10 dispensaries over the next 18 months. Like you want to grow, as a sort of retail chain. What we do is we help you identify those jurisdictions, right, that will accept cannabis applications and determine where you're most likely to be successful, compete for those licenses, win those licenses, and then operationalize that business as quickly as possible. So it's basically helping these dispensaries put together an expansion plan, say in California, but also helping them think about how they move out of state. There are now 24 states that have legalized adult use cannabis. Let's say that you've built a really successful kind of retail chain in California, and you're trying to think about what other states provide prime opportunities for you to expand further. That's going to be a key question that many brands and dispensaries are going to be asking themselves, today and in the future. And that's a big part of what we do, which is to say, let's understand the entire landscape for cannabis, both in this state and in other states, and help you make strategic decisions about how and where you're going to expand, especially in such a capital intensive industry. And the way I think about it is like, look, I could never run one of these businesses, right? Like it requires a tremendous amount of skill to run a retail cannabis business. So the clients I work with, they're really good at doing that. And what I enjoy doing is helping figure out how to, allow them to be more successful by identifying where it makes sense for them to expand and where they can use all of their talents to build a sustainable and durable retail cannabis business.
Would you advise a retail if they needed to reposition themselves as well? Is that as open as you would, lay it out for them? Basically, you would consult them in whichever way it would help them to grow, whichever, way that meant for them.
Yeah. And maybe that means sometimes like you've expanded too quickly, right? And like, there are dispensaries you can't support. So yeah, it's, obviously they know best how to sell weed, right? For lack of a better term. I don't have those skills, right? They're really good at figuring out what products to order and all these other things. Where I come in is helping them think about like, what kind of a footprint makes sense for you? How much do we want to expand, right? Are there particular retail assets that may become more challenging going forward? I mean, I'll give you a very specific example, Casey, right? 2 years ago, there was about 50 dispensaries in California. In San Francisco. Today, there are close to 100 dispensaries in San Francisco. That was very foreseeable, right? Because so many of these decisions are made at the local level, you can anticipate how these local markets are likely to unfold over time. And, just that little piece of information can help operators make more strategic decisions about where they want to expand and what their business might look like in the future, just given, sort of evolving regulatory dynamics.
Sitting down with, I think it was Flow Hire, I can't remember, but I think you were saying something about licenses are given out, but they're given out in a certain amount of a radius. And so then there's like 100 shops within a radius or a zone. And so it's really hard to compete when especially in like, let's say Los Angeles. Can we talk a little bit about that? Obviously, my audience may be, thinking it's easy to just pop a retail store open, but I think it's also competitive. It's not just easy. It's hard to get licensing. It's hard to actually, do the whole processing. But once you're actually in there and you're running, it's still very competitive on top of all the regulatory issues that most retailers have to face today.
Yeah, I mean, and these are the issues that we really dive deep into. It's like, okay, where do you want to open up a dispensary? What cities are your possible options? How many licenses is this city going to issue? How many licenses do we think this market is going to support? What are the allowable zones for cannabis in this jurisdiction, right? How do the different zoning constraints impact how many stores are going to be able to open up? Right? What is this city looking for in the competitive licensing process, right? These cities have a lot of discretion to determine who they want to award their licenses to, right? So is there a type of operator that the city is looking for? Someone with a lot of experience, an operator that, you know, is unionized, right? An operator that is local, for example. So that's kind of what we do, which is to say, hey, you're really good at doing what you do, which is open up dispensaries. Now let's think about what markets present the best opportunities, what that level of competition is going to look like, and help you figure out where you're best positioned to succeed. And yes, as you said, navigate, you know, all of the thorny sort of licensing and zoning processes, you know, obtaining a conditional use permit, all of the things that make cannabis a harder business than other business. Like, how do we provide some information on those different sort of characteristics so you can make an informed decision about how you want to grow?
Yep. I completely agree with all of that. And thank you for sharing that. It's always fascinating to hear you speak because you touch on all different levels that I think it's very valuable to our audience here and everybody in the community to learn about. To that point, I do want to know what you feel about the conversations that happen. I know you touched on it a little bit about descheduling, rescheduling coming up, but I know it's a question that most of us want to know where people's stands are on it, especially with your background. Do you have any views on that or any insight as far as where do you think it's going to lean on?
Yeah, you know, I would describe rescheduling as an imperfect step in the right direction. That would, excuse me, kind of be my quick synopsis. And look, we could talk about rescheduling for a long time here, right? We could have an entire webinar about its pros and cons. I think the simple thing to acknowledge is, you know, yes, can it be criticized? Absolutely, right? There's something that is intellectually disingenuous about rescheduling, which is to say, you know, when you move cannabis from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, sure, you're acknowledging that cannabis has medical value. Sure, you're saying that it has a lower abuse potential, but there are far more dangerous drugs, you know, such as alcohol and cigarettes, you know, that kill hundreds of thousands of Americans each year that are not scheduled. So look, you can criticize rescheduling because there's a little bit of intellectual dishonesty there and continuing to, you know, to insist that cannabis be scheduled when more destructive things are not scheduled. You can also criticize rescheduling for saying, hey, you know, that doesn't change the fact that cannabis is federally illegal. It doesn't get anyone out of prison, right? It doesn't change the criminal penalties for cannabis. So I think all those are valid points, right? There are very valid reasons to say that rescheduling falls short. At the same time, right, I think if we take a step back, we will say, okay, the US government for the first time in its history has basically written a confession, right, has acknowledged that cannabis has medical utility, and they were suppressing information about the medical utility of cannabis for a long time. You know, I think it was very notable in the long memo that the Department of Health and Human Services wrote when they were explaining their decision to reschedule cannabis, that they compared cannabis again and again and again to alcohol, which is sort of like feeding off something you said earlier in the conversation, Casey, around people who, you know, are willing to drink, right, but are look down on cannabis. So although you can criticize, you know, rescheduling for falling short in many areas, it is the first time the US government has acknowledged the medical utility of cannabis. It is poignant that it goes to great lengths to highlight how much safer cannabis is than alcohol, because I think that's the drug that people are most familiar with in American life. And so, yeah, for the first time, we're establishing that cannabis has medical value. We need to build on this. We're not all the way there, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. And then perhaps, you know, maybe one or two other things that I'll say. As many of us know, one of the benefits of rescheduling would be the elimination of the 280E tax penalty, right? That's the penalty that basically makes it almost impossible to make money running a legal cannabis business because you're taxed at a 70% effective tax rate. In eliminating 280E, will it make all of the issues with cannabis go away? No, right? There will still be banking and other challenges, but it will give cannabis businesses a fair shot at being profitable. And I think that's what we need, right? We need an industry if we want to bring the benefits of the cannabis plant to a lot of people. So I think that's important. And then, you know, maybe the final thing I'll say, and this goes back to something I was saying earlier, I think there is both immense symbolic and practical value in the rescheduling of cannabis, right? When the US government is acknowledging that cannabis has medical utility, that is symbolically very powerful. But what it also may start to do is open up, say, health insurance companies to covering medical cannabis for the first time, right? It won't solve all of the banking challenges, but it also may lead to banks more banks being comfortable serving cannabis businesses. So that big announcement, I think, can have ripple effects on all of the other institutions, whether it's banks, whether it's stock exchanges or health insurance companies, whether it's insurance companies that deal with cannabis. And so I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, well put. I like asking that question just because I'm getting everybody's insight and perspective on each side. So I haven't heard it breaking down that way, and I'll take your word for it, being that you are the one that's going out to our law schools. So you guys heard it, and I think that's a great way for other people to kind of understand it and see it as a positive move forward. And little by little, eventually we'll get there. But I think the two aching points that you pointed out were the getting the prisoners out, whereas a lot of people are fighting that. So I love that you touched on that, and I thank you for that information as well. How would you say you navigate conversations about cannabis in social and professional settings? That I think I've seen you in all types of different events, and we'll ask if you're going to any, or if you're going to be exhibiting at any events. But you being a professional and having such a strong law background, how do you navigate through conversations with either new people or legacy people in the industry?
Yeah, I will say one of the great things about working in cannabis for the past 6 years is that I don't have to hide my cannabis use anymore, right? So although it's still tricky to navigate that conversation today, it was much trickier a decade ago. And before I worked in cannabis, I would have to hide it, in all of the jobs that I worked for. So I was sort of in the closet before, and now I'm able to be out of the closet with my cannabis use. And I think that's really a beautiful thing. And now when I talk to people who don't work in cannabis about my cannabis use, I'll get the occasional snicker, right? But it's a lot less common than it was 4 or 5 years ago. And that's why I think, things like this HHS, rescheduling thing is so powerful, right? If someone were to snicker at the fact that I work in cannabis, I think you can just point out, look, the US government just, published 250 pages of material that says, hey, this product has medical utility and is actually safer than the drug that most Americans consume. And so I think that's going back to what I was saying before, the symbolic power of that is that it allows people to have more open and transparent conversations about their cannabis use. So we've made a lot of progress there. I'd be lying if I said, I still don't hear the occasional joke, but we're trending in the right direction. And, I think it's incumbent upon those of us who believe in cannabis to speak with confidence, and to sort of assert what we know is true about the plant. And I think if we do that over time, then a lot of the stigma will diminish.
I love that. With that said, I know we have a couple events that happen all year long, a lot of big conference events. Did you happen to make it to MJ BizCon?
I did. Yeah, I've been the past 5 years, 6 years now. So
okay. Were you activated, or did you just enjoy it? I mean, it's a crazy week. I can't imagine, how to pick what's the best thing to do. But yeah, you actually, since we're on that point of events and you go often, just maybe some tips of which ones to go to and why you go to events, and like maybe some take backs of what you would expect when you do go to an event, or what you want to take back when you do, take the time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just state the obvious. Events can be really productive, right? Cannabis, although it's a growing community, it's still a small community of cannabis professionals that exist on some level. So events are one of the best opportunities that you have to build authentic and meaningful connections with people in the space. And so I would highly encourage people to attend cannabis events if they want to have a presence in this space and build a career in this space. I mean, I know that, almost all of the work that I do is because of people that I have met, right? Because of connections that I have. And a lot of these connections come from these different events. So I think they're tremendously useful. I was lucky enough to speak at MJ BizCon this past year on a panel about California, which I've done for the past few years. And that's a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. And so I love doing that. And so I would say, maybe people should think about the expertise that they have and sort of offer, sort of to be a speaker. I think that can be a way to get even more out of events. And look, there's so many different events out there. I've been to many of them. I'll call out a few. We have Hall of Flowers coming up later this year in March, which is in Ventura for the first time, which is a California trade show of retailers and brands. I'm really proud to say that one of my clients, Wheelhouse, will actually be the host dispensary for Hall of Flowers. So that's Wheelhouse in Ventura, a store that just opened a few weeks ago. And so I really encourage anyone going to Hall of Flowers to check out Wheelhouse in Ventura. I think it'll be one of the best dispensaries in California. So Hall of Flowers is great, just always a good time to connect with sort of the California cannabis community. MJ BizCon, as you mentioned before, obviously that's the granddaddy of them all. It can be very chaotic, but it's kind of the best opportunity to meet everyone in one place. And a few others that I've been to in the past, I may not go this year, but that I found to be valuable. I went to ICBC in Berlin, and just to see the cannabis industry in Germany start to take shape, and Germany is obviously the biggest economy in Europe. And so as it gets closer to legalizing, that will have a seismic impact in Europe. And so learning about the sort of European cannabis landscape was great. Also attending Spanibus in Barcelona was great. In Spain, they have social clubs that are fairly well developed, pretty cool spaces where you can consume. And so I think that helps you get a glimpse into how cannabis can be incorporated into hospitality. So that was great. There's many more I could name, but those are all good ones.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I will name one. Hopefully we see you at Emerald Cup this year. It's their 20th anniversary. It's 2 days. It's in Oakland. But yeah, I think you touched on a lot of important notes as far as when you go out to events is just getting to know the community, getting to know the people that you could help, collaborate with, and just learn from at the same time. So thank you for sharing all that information and, all the insight from your end of things as far as the, law background and just, what to look forward as the community moves in either descheduling or rescheduling. But before I let you go, I do have a rapid fire that's around your cannabis culture and your lifestyle of how you use cannabis. And that'll be it for tonight.
Great. Let's do it.
All right. Number 1, grinders or fingers?
Fingers. I'd say, I like getting my hands dirty a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's an old school way. It's not like often that I always had a grinder with me. I always say it's not till I had baby 2 that I have no time to sit there and enjoy the art of actually rolling. But yeah, no, for sure. Dispensary or plug?
Dispensary. Although, I'm lucky enough that I get all my cannabis free these days from different clients. So that's awesome. I mean, I don't hate on people who use the plug because legal cannabis is far too expensive in California, given the taxes, and it's often not convenient. But I believe in supporting the legal market, right? Like I respect people who are part of the legacy culture, but I think the way we get the most out of the cannabis plant is by having a functional legal market and that's selling safe, tested products that consumers have confidence in and don't feel the stigma. So anyways, dispensary.
That's a good answer, which I had suspected you would answer that being with your background. I only asked that because there's a lot of OGs in this industry, but a lot of them are saying the same thing. And I'm proud to see that because I think a lot of them either have stuff on shelf or are very much involved in moving the legislative part of it forward for the community as a whole. So floral or gasoline terps?
I don't know if I have a strong opinion there. I mean, I like all different types of terps, and even when it comes to strains, there are different strains or forms of consuming. So I would say both is my answer.
Okay. Do you have a favorite strain right now that you like or genetics?
I would say, I mean, OGs. I just love OGs. Those that's just kind of what I grew up like smoking, but. I'm always trying new form factors, right? New brands like that. There's a tremendous diversity of products and cannabis options out there. And I just love sampling all of them,
Yeah, same. As long as we've been consuming, I think I've seen so many different cool things come out of the cannabis industry, which is great. And I'm always willing to try it. So, and like you said, as long as they're licensed, I know that they're being tested, and that gives me more, openness to trying out these products without, worrying about it. But I do want to say it is important that these people are getting tested, or these brands are testing cannabis, because there's mold, there's all types of different things that can happen. That's not even actually to where the eye can see it. It's not till you open it. Mm-hmm. So, I am glad that we've developed to that point. Or joints.
Say that again. But did you say bong?
Yeah, bong tokes or joints.
Well, I would say joints. I don't really own a bong anymore. Well, I have in the past, but I don't really own a bong currently. So I would say more joints for me, and blunts. Actually.
Okay.
Blunts. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to get to that because my next question was going to be papers or leaves.
Yeah. I mean, again, I do both, right? I mean, I enjoy like smoking blunts as well. I mean, I actually find that switching up my form of consumption helps me get more out of it, right? Which is to say, I mentioned earlier, like I have my vape, like my Mammoth Heavy Hitters vape, which I love. But sometimes I'll put that down for a couple of days, and I'll kind of smoke a joint, and that induces an entirely new high. And so I like keeping it fresh.
Yeah, I agree. The only reason I asked with leaves, have you ever had a banana leaf?
Yeah.
What do you think of those?
I love them. Yeah. I mean, I think they're flavorful. Yeah.
All right. Live resin or rosin?
I would say probably rosin. Yeah, yeah.
For sure. The flavors nowadays, I'm like, this is just absolutely crazy. All right, last one. Cheech and Chong or Half Baked as a movie?
Half Baked. I mean, Half Baked is just iconic. I mean, I just have so many of those lines memorized, and yeah, I mean, just such a beautiful film.
We must be the same age because a lot of people are choosing Cheech and Chong, but I feel like everybody in my generation is like half baked, half baked. So it's interesting to see the diversity in that. All right. Well, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for sharing all the information that you did today and sharing some time with me. I look forward to seeing you at the next event. I know we have so many going on in California and just, overall the cannabis industry. So I know I'm bound to run into you soon. Any last words before we go? And actually, if you don't mind, if you don't share with everybody just where we can find you, whether that's LinkedIn or any other of the social media platforms.
Yeah, totally. Well, first, thanks so much for having me on, Casey. This was awesome. So I really appreciate that. In terms of last words, I think 2024 will be the most exciting year in the cannabis industry. There are so many exciting things that are happening at the state level with new states coming online. Conservative states like Ohio, Florida may have a ballot initiative this year. So we're seeing tremendous activity at the state level and then also at the federal level, right? As we talk about rescheduling, that's a really exciting conversation. So I will say this is the year where cannabis finally, breaks into, the mainstream in America in a serious way. So I think 2024 will be awesome and everybody should stay engaged. And yeah, you can find me on all social platforms under the name Ananda Strategy. So on Instagram, I'm Ananda Strategy. That's ANANDA Strategy. Same thing on the platform formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. I'm Ananda Strategy. And on Twitter in particular, I really like to post my different kind of like policy thoughts. And so if anyone is interested in that, feel free to follow me. And you can find me there and on LinkedIn as HIRSH JAIN.
Sweet. All right, perfect. I appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for your time. And for all of you guys watching, all of those links will be in our description. His brand story will be there as well, and his website so that you guys can reach out to him should you guys need that help. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Make sure you guys jump in the comments. If you guys have any questions or you guys enjoy this, make sure you guys give it a thumbs up. Peace.